Thank you. And thank you to the museum, to Bartomeu Mari, to Sunny and her team for inviting me to participate today. I have a lot of slides to get through, so I may be going quickly through the images. And first, I'm planning to give a little bit of background on the history of the Guggenheim's engagement with international art, and then to focus on one of our most recent programs, the Guggenheim UBS MAP Global Art Initiative. Since its founding in 1937, the Solomon R. Guggenheim Museum has been recognized for its internationalism and mission to promote the transformative potential of art. Unlike other museums founded contemporaneously in New York during the 1930s, the Whitney Museum of American Art, distinguished by its national parameters, and the Museum of Modern Art, notable for its encyclopedic approach to the history of modernist culture, the Guggenheim was initially committed to one specific aesthetic vision: non-objectivity in art. Articulated by its founder, Hilla von Riebe, who's seen here second from the right, epitomized visually by the painter Vasily Kandinsky, second from left, and endowed by Solomon R. Guggenheim, sitting on the left, and his wife Irene stands, or on the right, his wife Irene on the left. This collective vision of pure painterly abstraction, exemplified here by work by Kandinsky, served as the catalyst for a remarkable, though idiosyncratic, amassing of a collection of canvases and works on paper, which championed the notion of abstraction as a regenerative art full of utopian implications that would transcend boundaries for the betterment of humankind. This is an image of the Museum of Non-Objective Painting, which preceded the Solomon R. Guggenheim Museum, showing that same work by Kandinsky. By championing the work of the European avant-garde, the museum became an important beacon from the outset in New York for cross-cultural exchange reflecting modern and contemporary artists from both sides of the Atlantic. During the 1950s and 60s, the museum expanded its commitment to a broad-reaching internationalism, an illustration of which can be found in the Guggenheim International Award, image of one of the installations here. This was established in 1956 and continued until 1971. The program was founded with the purpose of creating a major contemporary art prize that would, quote, stimulate public interest in art in as many parts of the world as possible, and intentionally included artists from beyond Western Europe and the United States. The first three awards bestowed grants of $10,000 to the winner and $1,000 to national and regional artists, and were organized with the input of international juries selected from three organizations of art museum directors, art critics, and artists, these being the International Council of Museums, International Association of Critics, and International Association of Plastic Arts, each of whom nominated representatives from different countries. While the 1964 award was organized by Guggenheim curator Lawrence Alloway, who traveled around the world making selections. Beginning in 1967, the series was renamed the Guggenheim International Exhibition, with funds redirected towards acquiring artworks from the project for the Foundation's collection. And then images of the sixth and final exhibition in 1971, where a work by Daniel Buren, an enormous striped canvas hung in the center of the rotunda, was famously removed from the exhibition in response to protests from other exhibition artists. While North American and Western European nations were amply represented throughout the tenure of the program, artists were also selected from several Latin American nations, such as Argentina, Brazil, Chile, and Colombia, as well as Egypt, Japan, and South Africa. Of course, the geographic scope was still quite limited. Additionally, the Guggenheim did organize occasional exhibitions of international contemporary art in the 60s and 70s, including an exhibition of Latin American painting of the 1960s, seen here, called the Emergent Decade. Also a show of contemporary Japanese art in 1970. And solo presentations of Venezuelan artist Jesus Rafael Soto in 1974, the Mexican painter Rufino Tamayo in 1979. The international reach of the foundation was solidified in 1976 when Solomon's niece, the famed gallerist and patron of the arts Peggy Guggenheim, bequeathed her collection and the palazzo that houses it on the Grand Canal in Venice to the New York-based institution. Comprised of over 300 objects, the collection is renowned for its wealth of cubist, surrealist, and abstract masterpieces. Peggy Guggenheim's sensitivity to the stylistic currents overlooked by her uncle Solomon, namely surrealism and early American abstract expressionism, resulted in a collection rich in genres that were then absent from the New York Museum's holdings. When considered in concert, these two collections formed a bicontinental entity that began to trace the complex and multivalent history of 20th century art in Europe and the United States. From this emerged the idea of a decentralized museum with sites around the world. Furthering this, during the 1990s, under the directorship of Thomas Krenz, the museum redefined itself as an international institution, expanding not just architecturally, but geographically through alliances with public and private trusts around the world. Krenz's idea was to reinvent the museum model. He envisioned the institution as a, quote, single museum with discontiguous galleries, a concept that was born at a time when the world itself was undergoing significant dynamic geopolitical and economic shifts with the emergence of globalization. The cultural and intellectual implications for a network of affiliated institutions sharing programming and collections were only just imagined at this formative stage. Originally, the concept required that each constituent museum would be unique in terms of its architecture and programming, but would operate from a single curatorial perspective, which was crafted in New York. This idea has since evolved over the past 2 decades, and the notion of a network or constellation with multiple centers and curatorial programs has emerged. With this model, every site is rooted in its locality and is actively generative, defined by both its connection to an international association of cultural institutions and its position within its own local and regional culture. The Guggenheim Museum Bilbao, shown here, opened in 1997 in the city of Bilbao in the Basque region of Spain. It was designed by American architect Frank Gehry and quickly became an architectural icon as well as a catalyzing force for economic and cultural renewal. The museum exhibits modern and contemporary art from around the world and has assembled a small collection that focuses on a European and American post-war axis with an important and still growing concentration on contemporary Basque and Spanish artists. More recently, the Guggenheim has been involved in developing a museum in Abu Dhabi that aims to be a preeminent platform for global contemporary art and culture that is deeply rooted in the Middle East as an axis between Europe, Asia, and Africa, and will contribute, we hope, to a more inclusive and transcultural perspective on modern art history. Also designed by Frank Gehry, though not yet under construction, the large-scale Museum of Modern and Contemporary Art will be built on Sariyat Island, adjacent to the island of Abu Dhabi City. Conceived as a sophisticated cultural center, Sariyat Island will also hosts now the Louvre Abu Dhabi, recently opened, that was designed by Jean Nouvel, and will be the site of a museum devoted to the national patrimony of the United Arab Emirates, designed by Norman Foster, in consultation with the British Museum. Through its permanent collection, exhibitions, publishing, and educational programs, the Guggenheim Abu Dhabi will promote a transcultural perspective on art and visual culture from the 1960s to the present that will have a strong focus on art from North Africa, West Asia, and South Asia, exploring the specific identity derived from the cultural traditions of Abu Dhabi and the UAE. The program and collection of the Guggenheim Abu Dhabi will move beyond a definition of global art premised primarily on geography by focusing on the interconnected dynamics of local, regional, and international art centers, as well as their diverse historical context and sources of creative inspiration. I should note that each of the museums that are part of our network or constellation have access to one another's collections, frequently borrowing works for exhibition. These conversations have complemented New York-based activities that continue to encourage an engagement with art beyond the Euro-American-centric viewpoint. For example, in 2006, the Guggenheim in New York launched its Asian Arts Initiative, led by Samsung Senior Curator of Asian Art and Senior Advisor for Global Arts, Alexandra Monroe, in recognition of the desire to integrate the history of modern and contemporary Asian art into the museum's exhibition programming and collecting activities. With over 100 acquisitions to date and exhibitions such as the Third Mind American Artists Contemplate Asia from 1860 to 1989, that took place in 2009. And seen here, the recent Art in China after 1989, Theater of the World, along with solo shows by Saiguo Chang in 2006 and Liu Fan in 2011, and the recent Robert H. N. Ho Family Foundation Chinese Art Initiative, with its program of curatorial residencies, exhibitions, publications, and commission-based acquisitions. The activities of the Asian Art Initiative serve to promote research and interpretation within an evolving transnational model of modern and contemporary art history. Today, I will be focusing on another initiative in greater depth, the Guggenheim UBS MAP Global Art Initiative. This was a project supported by UBS that was launched in 2012 and ended just earlier this year. It was intended to further the Guggenheim's legacy of supporting art from beyond Europe and North America by engaging with contemporary artists, curators, and educators in 3 historically underrepresented regions within the institution's collection: South and Southeast Asia, Latin America, and the Middle East or West Asia and North Africa. MAP evolved out of an institutional self-analysis in which we asked ourselves what it meant to be a global museum today. How can the museum, with its own history steeped in European modernism, become meaningfully transnational without losing sight of our own legacy? How can we recalibrate our methodology from collecting to exhibition making to programming so that it reflects the multiplicity of cultural practices and their histories around the globe? Of course, we're not the first museum in the United States or Europe to launch such a program, engaging with globalization, with such institutions as MoMA, Centre Pompidou, and Tate Modern, among others, also launching research and acquisition programs to investigate artistic practices around the world and to push the boundaries of the so-called Western canon, which has for so long dominated many aspects of the art world's horizons, especially in Europe and America. With the MAP initiative, the Guggenheim established a platform to support a concerted effort to research and expand the Guggenheim's collection with the possibility for greater and longer-lasting impact on the institution than might be achieved through temporary exhibitions or occasional acquisitions. For as I agree with Bartomeo's statement earlier, that the collection is really the DNA of the institution, tracing the history of the endeavors and decisions of the staff, as well as, of course, of the artists represented. For MAP, we conceived of a multi-year program that would allow for an open exchange among different cultures and involve curatorial residencies, acquisitions, exhibitions, public programming, and online platforms for distributing our curatorial and educational findings. We consulted with experts specializing in the cultural practices of each respective region to recommend qualified candidates to be our curatorial partners. And we were fortunate to identify Jun Yap, a colleague of Lisa's of Singapore, Pablo Leon de la Barra and Sarah Raza as the MAP curators. Each resident curator, with their breadth of knowledge and experience, was invited to collaborate with the Guggenheim for approximately 2.5-year-long period. Of course, we acknowledged that the regional structure was problematic, and each curator proposed their own characterization. We recognize that each of the designated regions is utterly heterogeneous and thus impossible to represent as a whole in any comprehensive manner. With that difficulty in mind, the MAP curators each identified themes and practices that they felt were most meaningful and relevant today, identifying artworks for acquisition and developing exhibitions and programs that would expand the museum's narrative of modern and contemporary art. Each map curator worked closely with the Guggenheim's curatorial team to consider the context of each artwork on its own merits, as well as within the larger scope of the museum's collection, and to identify the narratives that could be developed in relation with other artworks beyond the map acquisitions, contemplating what new aspects might be revealed when considered in dialogue with other works. As I indicated, the museum is really, we're not an encyclopedic institution. Our collection has particular strengths in abstraction and conceptual practices, and the curators really propose works that would complicate these histories that are represented already. 126 artworks by 88 artists and collectives from 37 countries were added to the collection in all. And while it was, I'm jumping ahead, sorry. As I noted, a challenge for the curators to develop for the project in terms of developing an engaging exhibition thesis alongside considerations of the Guggenheim's collection context for the artworks. Each curator admirably organized distinctive shows that garnered interest from visitors and critics alike. So I'll run through a few slides from each. The first exhibition, No Country, Contemporary Art for South and Southeast Asia, organized by June Yap, opened in New York in 2013 before traveling to the Asia Society Hong Kong Center and NTU Center for Contemporary Art in Singapore. Focused on the region's shifting spectrum of creative practices, the exhibition traced networks of intellectual exchange and influence and explored themes of national identity, community, cultural knowledge, power, and faith. No Country proposed an understanding of the region in terms of intermingling and mutual influence, past and present, within and beyond South and Southeast Asia. June identified 40 works by 27 artists and collectives for acquisition by the museum. These are some installation views from the presentation in Hong Kong and here in Singapore, basically doubling the representation of contemporary South and Southeast Asian artists in our collection. In 2014, the second map exhibition, Under the Same Sun, Art from Latin America Today, curated by Pablo Leandalabara, opened in New York before touring to the Museo Jumex in Mexico City and South London Gallery. This exhibition investigated creative responses of Latin American artists to complex shared realities that have been influenced by colonial and modern histories, repressive governments, economic crises, and social inequality, as well as by concurrent periods of regional and economic wealth, development and progress. This exhibition was organized around 5 themes: conceptualism, modernities, participation and emancipation, political activism, and the tropical. That's another view. And this, here are views from the Museo Jumex. Pablo expanded the collection with the acquisition of 57 works by 40 artists and collaborative duos. Here, translated again. The final exhibition, But a Storm is Blowing from Paradise, Contemporary Art of the Middle East and North Africa, organized by Sarah Raza, presented a spectrum of artistic voices and critical concerns from a rapidly evolving region. Interwoven with questions around the Middle East and North Africa's colonial histories, the exhibition, which was on view in New York in 2016 before traveling to the Galleria d'Arte Moderna in Milan, investigated such themes as movement, migration, architecture, and the process of uncovering hidden ideas, or what Sarah referred to as conceptual contraband. For this phase, Sarah identified 27 works by 20 artists for acquisition by the museum. While most of the acquisitions were by emerging and mid-career artists not yet represented in the museum's collection, this is some other views of Sarah's show, sorry. Here in Milan, it was in a palazzo, so quite a different architectural context. So as I mentioned, most were new to the collection, but some of the curators did identify works by artists already represented in our holdings. For example, the work on the right is the map acquisition by Lebanese artists Joanna Haji Thomas and Khalil Jourej, whom we'd already had a video in the collection. And then also Gabriela Roscoe, who's we had a commission and photographs, an installation of photographs, but no representations of his paintings in the collection. So we were able to bring that in through MAP, thereby allowing us to deepen our holdings to represent the greater breadth of some of these artists' practices. The curators also proposed acquisitions of more established artists, as well as some historical works of the 1970s and 80s, often to provide greater context for the practices of younger artists who were influenced by these figures. And here are some examples, works by pioneering Latin American conceptualists, many of whom were working actually in New York in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, such as Rafael Ferrer and Marta Menuhin, and then also work by Turkish artist Gülsen Kara Mustafa, which really allowed us to expand our story of conceptual art that we are able to tell. The MAP initiative has further prompted the museum to foster affinity groups responsible for continuing acquisitions of artworks from these regions. Here we have the Middle Eastern Circle, some of the acquisitions that they've brought in. And these committees are also dedicated to, beyond acquisitions, also supporting programs and exhibitions. And our Latin American circle, which the MAP curator Pablo León de la Barra continues to administer as our curator at large for Latin American art. When possible, these groups follow the practice of the MAP that the MAP curators really established, making an effort to buy from regional galleries to support local economies and art communities. Which is really supported by the group's patrons, many of whom originate from these regions. The addition of MAP artworks and artists is already altering the fabric of the collection to become a more inclusive and complex portrait of art history and a timely representation of the style, production, and urgency of ideas elucidated by today's global artists. Guggenheim curators have incorporated works into several collection installations. For example, here we see the inclusion of Cambodian artist Sophie Pich's rattan sculpture Morning Glory at the Guggenheim Museum Bilbao, an exhibition in 2014-15 of collection works from the collections of all of the Guggenheim network. Seen then here on the left with works by Spanish artist Cristina Iglesias from Bilbao's collection, Korean artist Kang Il-jung from the New York collection, and also the Ghanaian sculptor El Anatsui from the collection of the Guggenheim Abu Dhabi. In this area, a selection of works that were exploring the use of traditional materials and techniques. And then on the right is another view from that exhibition, not of MAP acquisitions, but works in the collection of the New York collection by Julie Moretu and Lee Bull. Integral to the MAP initiative was the meaningful cross-departmental exchange, engaging not only the curatorial and collections teams, but also education, communications, and digital content staff who are really involved throughout the process of curatorial research to encourage deeper appreciation of the artists and artworks, some of whom were coming from rather unfamiliar cultural contexts. The MAP curators were particularly critical in advising on educational programming for a variety of museums, museum audiences, and as the exhibition traveled. Programmatic highlights from Phase 1 during the presentation and tour of No Country include a private roundtable discussion, which was accompanied by a live-streamed public panel, which occurred at the Jim Thompson Art Center in Bangkok in 2012, prior to the exhibition, opening of the exhibition. This event provided a relatively rare opportunity for curators from the region to speak freely and informally in private, and allowed the MAP curator Joan Yap to introduce her curatorial thesis to colleagues for discussion. At each venue of the exhibition tour, workshops were conducted by map artists suggested by the curators. Here, including Pakistani artist Kadim Ali on the tradition of miniature painting and storytelling. He worked both in New York and conducted workshops in Hong Kong. Tayyibum Begum Lippi from Bangladesh worked with communities of South Asian immigrants in Hong Kong. And also new performances were commissioned from the Vietnamese artist Trong Thang in Hong Kong, providing audiences with exceptional opportunities to interact with exhibition artists. For the second phase, and from Latin America, the curator Pablo Leon de la Barra decided to focus on the pedagogical practices of exhibition artists, inviting Louise Kamnitzer to author a teacher's guide for the exhibition in both English and Spanish that was distributed to teachers throughout the tour and also available in our bookstore. He also invited artists to participate in residencies at SOMA, a Mexico City-based artist-run space and residency program. Also in London, Federico Herrero from Costa Rica was invited to collaborate with the local community on a public artwork for a playground near South London Gallery, where the exhibition took place. Pablo also commissioned artist and activist Tanya Bruguera to create a new performative work called the Francis Effect, for which the artist engaged with over 10,000 museum visitors in front of the Guggenheim, collecting signatures in support of her plan to ask Pope Francis to grant Vatican City citizenship to the world's immigrants. Pablo was able then, through these projects, he really wanted to capture and include some of the practices by the exhibition artists that were beyond, objects that could be collected, performance, social practice, etc. And here's also what I wanted to point out. We were able to restage Alfredo Yard's seminal public work, A Logo for America, which we had acquired through MAP, but was be able to restage for digital billboards in Times Square, which had first appeared 27 years earlier, as well as in Mexico City, and then in Piccadilly Circus in London, just actually after the Brexit vote. So in each, of course, location, the work took on new meanings in today's political climate. For the third phase, curator Sarah Raza commissioned a soundtrack for the exhibition by Beirut-based artist Raed Yassin, which was available to visitors on the museum's app and its SoundCloud channel, as well as a new participatory work by Israeli performance research group Public Movement that took place in the galleries and interrogated connections between politics and culture, including delving into the Guggenheim's own history. The museum also developed a rich online platform to present and contextualize the project's content, serving as a dynamic cross-cultural connector for ideas, discussions, and discovery. Designed as a hub to bring together news about the initiative and information about the artworks and artists, the website sought to create an experience with a magazine editorial feel. The intent was to capture aspects of the curatorial process, the research, travel, conversations that occurred as each curator traveled and identified works for acquisition, developed their exhibition concept. Supplementing and enhancing material about the exhibition and artworks were perspectives or texts commissioned from artists, curators, and scholars from within each region who shared their viewpoints about artistic practice and everyday life in their respective countries. This was a suggestion of the first MAP curator, Joan Yap, that continued throughout the project, allowing allowing these kind of contributions to explore topics, mediums, and communities beyond those that would be represented in the exhibition, and providing a more dynamic portrait of the artistic communities in each region. I should point out we published these. This was sort of publish these in their original language as well as English. So it was an opportunity, I think the first opportunity that we've been translating texts on our website. There were also artist pages that involved biographies, text on the artworks, but also images from the artist studios and interviews to share a greater sense of the context in which the artists work. The map site has become one of the most successful interactive online platforms in the museum's history, reaching hundreds of thousands of virtual visitors, so many more than who could visit the exhibitions. And these typically viewed more pages and spent more time on the site, averaging over 5 minutes per visit as opposed to the typical 2 minutes, and suggesting a desire for a deeper engagement with the material. One of the most important aspects of the MAP initiative was the opportunity created for the museum to engage in cross-cultural exchange, dialogue, and mutual understanding. We developed the project with the clear goal of participating in an already ongoing conversation and of making those discussions available to a wider cross-section of people both in New York and internationally. It is our hope to continue our engagement in these artistic and art historical discussions. We are endeavoring now to invite curators and artists for informal conversations and discussions of current projects with the Guggenheim's curatorial department when they are in New York. For example, most recently, Zoe Butt, formerly curator of Son Art and currently artistic director of the Factory Contemporary Arts Center in Ho Chi Minh City, joined us to discuss the challenges she's encountered in establishing a new art space in Vietnam and research she's conducting for the 2019 Sharjah Biennial. We also have exhibitions under development, a soon-to-be-announced show of Latin American artists in 2020, and our staff is working towards exhibitions of Middle Eastern and South and Southeast Asian artists. And while it may be too soon to determine really the long-term legacy of the MAP project, the curators, artists, and particularly the artworks have left an indelible imprint on the core of the institution. While each work acquired through MAP is unique, bearing the stamp of the circumstances in which it was created, together they reveal intersecting narratives, the entwined roots of community, and the movement of ideas. As they continue to be exhibited in new contexts, we hope these artworks will contribute to curatorial research, inspire inquiry and curiosity, and add inextricably to conversations at the museum and beyond about contemporary art and society. Thank you.